Hogwarts Golden Trio joins America's deadliest magical fugitives. To end Bellatrix's bloodline, Harry and his friends must cross a dark line they can never, ever uncross. Before we step into the kill zone, drop a like, hit subscribe, and comment present to check in. The Atlantic Ocean was a churning, gray void, a mirror of the despair that had swallowed Britain. Hermione Granger huddled in the corner of a rusted shipping container, the smell of salt and stale diesel thick in her lungs. Beside her, Ron Weasley's breathing was shallow, his face a pale ghost in the flickering light of a Lumos charm that Hermione kept dimmed to a mere spark. Neville Longbottom sat opposite them, his hands white-knuckled around a bundle wrapped in heavy, charmed canvas, the Sword of Gryffindor. They were no longer students. They were survivors of a fallen state. The British ministry had collapsed into a puppet regime under Bellatrix Lestrange, who had claimed the vacuum left by Voldemort's destruction as her personal throne of vengeance. She didn't want a new world order. She wanted the heads of those who had unmade her master. "We're almost there," Hermione whispered, her voice cracking. "The captain said the New York docks are just past the fog line." "And if the Snatchers are waiting?" Ron asked, his hand drifting to the holster at his hip. It wasn't just a wand holster anymore. It was a tactical rig they'd scavenged from a fallen Auror. "Then we do what Lily taught us in the letters," Neville said, his voice surprisingly firm. "We don't fight to win. We fight to punch a hole and move." The shipping container jolted as the vessel slowed. Above them, the rhythmic thud of heavy boots echoed. Nomage crew or something far worse. The International Confederation of Wizards had locked down the borders, but the American magical underworld was porous for those who knew which palms to grease with stolen galleons. As the doors groaned open, the cold, biting air of New York City rushed in. But it wasn't the welcoming skyline of postcards. It was a labyrinth of steel and concrete, drenched in a freezing rain that smelled of industrial rot and ancient, untamed magic. They stepped out onto the docks, wands drawn, eyes scanning the shadows. They weren't alone. From the fog, 5 figures emerged, wearing the long, dark coats of British Snatchers, their silver masks glinting under the dock lights. They had followed the trail across the sea. Granger, Weasley, Longbottom, the lead Snatcher sneered, his wand tip glowing a sickly green. "The matriarch wants you alive for the ritual, but she didn't say anything about your limbs." Hermione felt the familiar spike of terror, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, analytical stillness. She raised her wand, but before she could utter a spell, a sound like a thunderclap shattered the silence. It wasn't the sound of magic. It was the sharp, mechanical crack of a high-velocity projectile. The lead Snatcher's head snapped back, his mask shattering into 1,000 silver shards as he was thrown backward into a stack of wooden crates. "Sniper!" One of the Snatchers shrieked, diving for cover. 2 more cracks followed in rapid succession. The air hummed with the sound of enchanted mundane ballistics. Another Snatcher dropped, his shield charm shredded like wet paper by the rune-etched rounds. Then silence. The remaining Snatchers huddled behind a shipping container, their breathing frantic. Hermione, Ron, and Neville stayed frozen, caught between 2 predators. From the shadows above the warehouse roof, a figure dropped. He didn't use a slow-falling charm. He hit the concrete with a practiced roll and sprang up with the silent, terrifying grace of a predator. He wore dark, tactical combat robes and a harness bristling with knives and equipment. "Harry!" Ron gasped. The figure didn't turn. He moved toward the shipping container where the Snatchers were hiding. He didn't fire his wand. He drew a combat knife, the blade etched with darkening runes. He was a blur of motion, flanking the Snatchers before they could reorient. The screams that followed were short, clinical, and horrific. When the figure finally stepped into the light of the dock lamps, the trio recoiled. This wasn't the boy who had shared pumpkin pasties on the Hogwarts Express. Harry Potter stood before them, his messy dark hair damp with rain, his face a mask of stone. His left arm was bare to the elbow, revealing a roadmap of thick, jagged lightning strike burn scars. Carved directly over those scars were fresh, bloody black family blood runes that pulsed with a faint, angry crimson light. His eyes, once a vibrant green, held the dull, terrifying stillness of frozen jade. "You're late," Harry said, his voice devoid of warmth. "The perimeter is compromised. We have to move before the Makusa patrol picks up the resonance of those kills." "Harry, you killed them," Hermione whispered, staring at the bodies. "I neutralized a threat," Harry corrected, sheathing his knife. "Welcome to America. Try to keep up." The journey from the New York docks to the southern reaches of the Appalachian Mountains was a blur of illegal port keys and high-speed transit in a matte-black tactical transport vehicle. Harry sat in the back, methodically cleaning his rifle, his jade eyes never lingering on his old friends for more than a second. He's integrated his mind with the vehicle's targeting arrays. A gravelly voice crackled over the comms. "Sirius?" Ron asked, looking at the dashboard. "In the flesh. Or what's left of it," Sirius Black replied. When they finally reached the stronghold, a heavily fortified bunker hidden beneath a decaying plantation manor, the full weight of the Potter's transformation hit them. The air around the manor thrummed with a heavy, oppressive warding network. Sirius was waiting in the atrium, strapped into an intricate, hovering mechanical wheelchair etched with glowing runes and hidden weaponry. He was emaciated, his gray eyes sunken but burning with a dark, manic intensity. But it was Lily Potter who commanded the room. She stood by a holographic tactical map of the Atlantic, her face hardened and beautiful. Her striking auburn hair now featured a prominent, bone-white streak at the right temple, the permanent toll of the soul-burning magic she had used to destroy Voldemort. She wore black tactical dragonhide gear, a modified assault rifle slung across her chest. "Hermione, Ronald, Neville," Lily said, her voice like steel. "I'm glad you're alive, but nostalgia is a luxury we can't afford. Bellatrix is crossing the Atlantic, and she isn't coming for the president this time. She's coming for us." Hermione looked at Harry, who was already at a workbench, adjusting the tension on his tactical harness. "What happened to you, Harry?" Harry looked up, his frozen jade eyes meeting hers. "I became what was necessary," he said simply. "I'm the executioner my mother molded me to be. And right now, the world needs an executioner." In the war room, Hermione laid out the grim reality of Britain. "It's not just a hunt anymore, Lily. Bellatrix calls it the family revenge. She's convinced that the Potter bloodline is a cancer that needs to be cauterized. She's gathered the remnants of the inner circle, those who survived the mountain, and she's weaponized the British ministry's goal to hire international mercenaries. She's coming for the Black Bloodline too," Sirius rasped, his mechanical chair humming as he zoomed in on a map of the U.S. East Coast. "She considers me the ultimate traitor. She wants to see my spine snapped before she finishes Lily." "We know her tactics," Lily said, her pale eyes holding a chilling spectral emptiness. "She's arrogant. She'll establish a forward base in a place that reflects her status. Somewhere old. Somewhere with pure roots. Boston," Hermione said. "Specifically, the aristocratic magical enclaves near Salem. Our intelligence says her vanguard has already touched down." Lily nodded. "She thinks she's bringing the war to us. She doesn't realize we've spent the last year turning the American wilderness into a kill zone." Harry stepped forward, his scarred arm throbbing with the resonance of the dark magic nearby. "We don't wait for her to build a castle. We hit her scouts, we bleed her supply lines, and we force her into the open." "Harry," Neville spoke up, his voice trembling slightly. "There are innocent people in Boston. Families." Harry turned to Neville, his expression unchanging. "In a war of survival, innocent is just a word for people who haven't been targeted yet. Bellatrix won't care about the statute of secrecy. Neither can we." The following days were a grueling immersion into the Potter's world. The Hogwarts trio was forced into a training regimen that felt more like a military boot camp than a defense class. Lily walked the perimeter, her ignis anima burning in her core, a cold void demanding to be fed. She watched Hermione struggle with a kinetic ward breaker. "Focus, Hermione," Lily commanded. Dumbledore's shields were built for a world of rules and mercy. Bellatrix doesn't play by rules. You need to learn how to collapse a ward so it implodes on the caster. Meanwhile, in the forest clearing, Harry was sparring with Ron and Neville. He moved with impossible speed, his combat knife a silver flash in the dappled sunlight. "You're too slow," Harry barked, parrying Ron's Expelliarmus with a casual flick of a kinetic absorption rune on his bracer. "You're waiting for the incantation. Don't wait. Watch the eyes. Watch the weight distribution." "We aren't soldiers, Harry," Ron shouted, wiping sweat and dirt from his face. "Then your targets," Harry countered, his voice cold. "Bellatrix is bringing a private army. They won't give you a 10-second head start. They will cut you down while you're still trying to remember the proper wand movement." By nightfall, the fortress was a hive of activity. Sirius was monitoring Makusa's encrypted channels, his face illuminated by the blue glow of holographic tactical maps. "We have movement," Sirius announced. "A vanguard of 20 Snatchers and 2 Inner Circle members have touched down in a private airfield in Virginia. They're moving toward the Appalachians." Lily looked at her son. Harry was already donning his tactical jacket, checking the edge of his blade. "Let them come," Lily said, her bone-white hair streak glowing faintly in the dim light. "They want a family revenge. We're going to give them an American myth." The Appalachian safe house was a far cry from the warm, chaotic burrow or the ancient, comforting stone of Hogwarts. It was a subterranean concrete fortress, smelling perpetually of ozone, gun oil, and the faint, coppery tang of old blood. Hermione Granger sat at a heavy iron desk in the armory, desperately trying to apply the logic of Hogwarts library text to a stolen Makusa warding manual. She flinched as a shadow fell over her textbook. Lily Potter stood there, her striking auburn hair broken by the stark, bone-white streak at her right temple, the permanent brand of the soul-burning Ignis Anima curse. Lily didn't speak. She simply raised her hand and wordlessly cast an incendio. Hermione gasped as the Hogwarts text on defensive magical theory burst into flames. "What are you doing?" Hermione cried, scrambling to extinguish the fire. "Saving your life," Lily replied coldly, her pale green eyes devoid of any maternal warmth. "Dumbledore's curriculum was designed for a civilized world. He taught you how to disarm, how to stun, how to politely bow before a duel. Bellatrix Lestrange is not going to bow, Hermione. She's going to butcher you." Hermione stared at the smoking ashes of the book. "We can't just abandon our humanity, Lily. If we fight like monsters, how are we any better than them?" Lily leaned down, placing her hands on the iron desk. Her skin was incredibly pale, radiating a terrifying, absolute cold. "You still think this is a war of ideologies? It isn't. It's an extermination. The Death Eaters want to cleanse the world of your blood. You don't defeat an exterminator with a disarming charm." Lily tossed a heavy, rune-etched kinetic warding sink onto the desk. It was an ugly, utilitarian piece of dark metal. Standard Protego shields absorb magic. Kinetic wards reflect physical trauma and localized concussive force. Bellatrix won't just use the killing curse. She'll collapse the roof on your head. She'll transfigure the air into glass shards. Learn to build the kinetic wall, or you will die in the first 10 seconds of the next breach. Hermione looked at the heavy metal object, her hands trembling. She looked up at Lily, the mother of her best friend, who had sacrificed a decade of her own lifespan to permanently unmake Voldemort's spirit. The idealism of Hogwarts was dead. The American wilderness demanded something far darker. Chapter 7. The Salem Infiltration. Boston's magical enclave, hidden in plain sight near the historical grounds of Salem, was a bastion of old money and aristocratic bloodlines. It was the perfect forward operating base for Bellatrix's vanguard. To blend in, they had organized a masquerade gala at an elite, magically expanded manner, rallying the quiet sympathizers of the American pureblood elite. Harry and Ron stood in the shadows of a grand ballroom balcony, disguised under heavy, meticulously crafted glamour charms. Harry wore a tailored dark suit that hid his tactical harness, though the jagged burn scars and black family blood runes on his left arm throbbed beneath his sleeve in the presence of so much dark magic. "Target acquired," Harry whispered, his voice in a motionless flatline. "Yaxley. He's acting as Bellatrix's quartermaster. I'm moving to isolate." Ron nodded, his throat tight. He was supposed to watch Harry's back, but moving through the elegant crowd felt surreal after the filth of the shipping container. 10 minutes later, Ron followed Harry's magical signature into a soundproof coat room down a restricted hallway. What he found made his blood run cold. The glamour charm had fallen from Harry. He stood in his dark tactical robes, his frozen jade eyes locked onto Yaxley. The Death Eater was pinned to the wall, suspended by his neck. But Harry wasn't using a wand. He had driven his enchanted combat knife straight through Yaxley's hand, pinning it to the expensive oak paneling. "Where's the Transatlantic portkey terminus?" Harry asked, his voice a chilling echo of the monster he had exorcised months ago in the MACUSA Oval Office. "I don't know," Yaxley spat, coughing up blood. "The matriarch, she keeps it hidden. She's going to flay your mother alive, Potter." Harry's expression didn't shift a millimeter. He didn't blink. He simply twisted the hilt of the knife. Yaxley shrieked, a raw, agonizing sound muffled by the room's silencing wards. Harry stopped. Ron hissed, stepping into the room, horrified. "You have him captured. We can use Veritaserum." Harry glanced at Ron, annoyed by the interruption. "Veritaserum takes 20 minutes to brew a counteragent. Pain is instantaneous." He looked back at Yaxley, pressing a thumb against the Death Eater's bruised windpipe. "Give me the coordinates, or I will start carving off pieces you actually need." Ron backed away, his stomach violently turning. He looked at his best friend and realized that the boy who had played wizard chess in the Gryffindor common room had died in the Yukon bunker. Only the weapon remained. Back at the Appalachian fortress, Sirius Black navigated his massive, heavily warded wheelchair into the central armory. He was emaciated, his nervous system permanently burned out, leaving him paralyzed from the neck down, but his mind was sharper and more dangerous than ever. Neville Longbottom sat on a munitions crate, carefully unwrapping the heavy canvas bundle he had smuggled out of Britain. The silver blade of the sword of Gryffindor caught the dim, industrial lighting. The rubies on its hilt gleamed like fresh blood. "A goblin-wrought relic," Sirius rasped, his sunken gray eyes analyzing the weapon from his chair. "Imbibes only that which makes it stronger. Remarkable piece of metal, Longbottom." At that moment, Harry entered the armory, returning from the Boston infiltration. As he stepped within 10 feet of Neville, a violent reaction occurred. The blood-soaked bandages on Harry's left arm, concealing the dark, stabilizing runes Sirius had instructed him to carve into his own flesh before assassinating the MACUSA president, began to burn with an angry, searing red light. Harry grimaced, dropping to one knee, clutching his arm. Simultaneously, the sword of Gryffindor emitted a high-pitched, harmonic ringing. A wave of pure, white kinetic energy blasted outward from the blade, shattering a row of glass potions vials on the opposite wall. "Put away," Harry snarled through gritted teeth, the dark magic in his scars violently repelled by the sword. Neville hurriedly wrapped the blade in the canvas, and the oppressive pressure in the room vanished. Harry stood up, his breathing heavy, his frozen jade eyes narrowed at the bundle. Sirius, however, began to laugh, a wet, gravelly sound. He triggered the controls on his armrest with a micro-twitch of his facial muscles, bringing up a holographic arithmancy array. "Do you know what you brought us, Neville?" Sirius asked, his eyes wide with manic brilliance. "The sword is saturated with basilisk venom. Yes, but it's fundamentally a weapon of the light. When exposed to highly concentrated dark magic, like Bellatrix's blood curses or Harry's anchor runes, it acts as a magical EMP, an electromagnetic pulse." Lily walked into the armory, drawn by the noise, her assault rifle slung over her shoulder. "Explain." "If we can amplify the sword's resonance frequency," Sirius detailed, his tactical mind racing, "we can use it to instantly shatter Death Eater shields. We can weaponize Gryffindor's legacy to tear down Bellatrix's dark wards." The intelligence Harry had extracted from Yaxley was accurate, but Bellatrix's scouts were faster than anticipated. At 0300 hours, the perimeter alarms of the Appalachian base screamed to life. Breach! Sector 4. Sirius's mechanical voice echoed over the base's comm system. A dozen Snatchers and at least 3 heavy hitters. They bypassed the outer kinetic tripwires. Hermione was jolted awake. The deafening roar of explosions rocked the subterranean ceiling, sending dust raining down on her cot. She grabbed her wand and sprinted into the concrete corridors, finding chaos. Remus Lupin was laying down concussive fire with his heavy repeating crossbow, the silver bolts exploding on impact against the concrete walls. The British Snatchers were pushing hard, firing a barrage of lethal green light down the hallway. "Fall back to the armory!" Remus roared, his face feral, his eyes flashing with the wolf's predatory aggression. Ron was providing cover fire with standard stunning spells, but his Hogwarts magic was painfully inadequate against the Snatchers' relentless assault. A massive blasting curse shattered the concrete pillar Ron was using for cover. The shockwave threw Ron to the ground, his wand skittering across the blood-slicked floor. 2 Snatchers advanced through the smoke, their wands pointed directly at Ron's chest. Hermione was 10 yards away. She raised her wand, but the incantation for a shield charm caught in her throat. She remembered Lily's cold, absolute warning. You don't defeat an exterminator with a disarming charm. She didn't cast a spell. Instead, Hermione dropped her wand. She dove toward a supply crate, her hands wrapping around the cold steel of a spare Makusa tactical assault rifle, the same weapon Lily used with such devastating effect. Hermione didn't know the magical runes etched into the chamber, but she knew the brutal, mundane mechanics of the weapon. She hoisted the heavy rifle, braced the stock against her shoulder, and squeezed the trigger. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire in the enclosed space was physically agonizing. The enchanted, armor-piercing rounds tore down the corridor. They shredded the Snatchers' magical shields as if they didn't exist, ripping through flesh and bone. The Snatchers dropped instantly, the corridor falling into a ringing, terrifying silence. Ron stared up at Hermione from the floor, his eyes wide with shock. Hermione stood frozen, her hands gripping the smoking barrel of the rifle, her chest heaving. She had just taken 2 human lives. There was no going back to the library. The brilliant, moralistic Gryffindor had finally crossed the line into the dark, violent reality of the Potter Pack. The attack on the Appalachian base demanded an immediate, disproportionate response. The Pack needed to send a message to Bellatrix Lestrange. The United States was not her hunting ground. It was her graveyard. Intelligence indicated Bellatrix's main supply of dark artifacts, heavy weaponry, and international reinforcements was arriving via a heavily warded ghost ship at the Boston docks at midnight. The Potter Pack didn't use stealth. They arrived with apocalyptic force. A localized spatial distortion deposited them on the slick, rain-swept docks. Before the Death Eater guards could even raise the alarm, Lily Potter unleashed a continuous stream of suppressing fire, her rifle spitting enchanted expanding rounds that shattered the wooden crates and tore through the Death Eater's defensive lines. Remus Lupin moved through the rain like a shadow of pure violence. He had abandoned his usual defensive posture entirely. He fought alongside Neville Longbottom, teaching the boy the lethal rhythm of tactical combat. Don't aim for the chest. Aim for the ground beneath their feet. Remus shouted over the roar of battle, firing his crossbow. A concussive silver bolt struck the wet pavement, the explosion throwing 3 Death Eaters into the freezing harbor water. Neville charged forward, a terrifying mix of Gryffindor bravery and American ruthlessness. A massive, masked Death Eater stepped in his path, conjuring a dense, black wall of dark magic that absorbed incoming spells. Neville, the resonance. Sirius's voice commanded through the comms piece in Neville's ear. Neville didn't use his wand. He drew the sword of Gryffindor. He channeled his profound grief for his parents, for his lost childhood, for the broken world around him, into his grip. He swung the goblin-wrought blade directly into the dark magical shield. The resulting EMP shockwave was blinding. The white kinetic energy shattered the Death Eater's shield into a million dissipating fragments, knocking the masked man unconscious and clearing the path to the ghost ship. Harry Potter vaulted onto the deck of the vessel, moving with the terrifying, silent grace of a phantom. He moved below deck, planting volatile, kinetically charged explosive runes on the ship's massive hull. Within 10 minutes, the strike was over. The pack operated to a safe distance on a neighboring rooftop. Below them, the ghost ship erupted in a spectacular, towering fireball, incinerating Bellatrix's supplies and sinking her transatlantic ambitions to the bottom of the Boston harbor. Lily stood on the edge of the rooftop, her bone-white hair whipping in the stormy wind, her empty green eyes reflecting the flames of the burning ship. They had struck the first blow of the war. But deep in her dark, hollowed core, Lily knew that Bellatrix Lestrange would not retreat. The matriarch of the Death Eaters would simply escalate, setting the stage for a collision that would shatter both their bloodlines forever. The subterranean command center of the Appalachian fortress was typically filled with the low, steady hum of encrypted Makusa radio frequencies and the mechanical whir of Sirius Black's heavily warded, floating wheelchair. Sirius, paralyzed from the neck down after his nervous system was permanently burned out by Black family magic, lived entirely in the digital and arithmetic ether. He was the pack's ruthless tactical overarching mind. But at 0400 hours, the comforting static of intercepted patrol routes suddenly died. The glowing holographic maps of the eastern seaboard flickered and bled to a sickly, dark crimson. Sirius? Harry asked, looking up from the combat knife he was sharpening. Did Makusa rotate their encryption keys again? No, Sirius rasped, his sunken gray eyes widening in sudden, primal panic. This isn't an encryption block. This is a localized transmission override. Someone is hijacking the base's internal ley lines. The speakers mounted in the corners of the concrete ceiling hissed, emitting a sound like dry leaves scraping over a tombstone. Then a voice cut through the bunker. Hi, mocking and dripping with aristocratic venom. Did you really think an ocean could hide you, blood traitor? Hermione, Ron, and Neville rushed into the command center, wands drawn, though there was no physical enemy to fight. Lily followed, her face a mask of absolute ice. I must admit, Sirius. Bellatrix Lestrange's voice purred from the speakers, echoing off the cold walls. I expected you to die like a dog in the mud, but to hear you've reduced yourself to a crippled machine, hiding in the American dirt, it's almost too pathetic to punish. Trace the signal, Lily ordered, gripping her assault rifle. I can't, Sirius choked out, his head lolling slightly to the side as his wheelchair began to shudder. She isn't using radio waves. She's using blood resonance. I went back to Grimmauld Place before we crossed the Atlantic, Bellatrix whispered, her voice intimately close, as if she were standing right behind him. I stripped the tapestry from the wall. The family tree, Sirius. Our bloodline. You burned your own name off it years ago, but the threads remember. Sirius's emaciated body suddenly went rigid. The heavy canvas webbing strapping him into his chair strained. A blood curse requires a profound connection. Bellatrix laughed, a manic, shrieking sound. And there is nothing more profound than family. Let's see how much pain that broken spine can take before it snaps completely. Shut it down. Harry roared, lunging toward the console. But it was too late. Over the comms, they heard the sharp, tearing sound of ancient fabric being ripped, followed by the sizzle of dark fire. Sirius screamed. It was a raw, agonizing sound of complete systemic failure. The kinetic absorption runes etched into the goblin-wrought steel of his wheelchair flared blindingly bright, trying to process the massive influx of dark magic attacking its occupant. The chair's levitation charms shorted out violently. With a deafening crash of sparking metal, Sirius's heavy mechanical chair plummeted to the concrete floor. He convulsed wildly, blood pouring from his nose and ears, as Bellatrix's laughter faded into static. The medical bay of the bunker smelled of burnt ozone, sterile bandages, and impending death. Lily Potter stood over Sirius's unconscious form, her hands glowing with frantic, pulsing healing magic. But the damage was catastrophic. The blood curse had violently attacked the remaining fragile pathways of his brain. Hermione stood in the doorway, weeping silently, while Ron held her shoulder. They had just watched a man be tortured through a radio broadcast. Lily stopped casting. She lowered her trembling hands, bracing them against the edge of the metal cot. The toll of the Ignis Anima, the soul-burning curse she had used to incinerate Voldemort's spirit, was starkly visible. Her striking red hair bore a thick, stark streak of bone white at the right temple, and her once vibrant skin held a chilling, spectral emptiness. "He's slipping into a coma," Lily stated, her voice completely devoid of inflection. "The curse is necrotic. It's slowly shutting down his organs." "Can we reverse it?" Neville asked desperately. "The only way to break a blood curse tied to an object is to kill the caster and burn the object," Lily said. She turned away from Sirius, her green eyes dead and hollow. She walked over to her tactical locker and pulled open the heavy steel doors. She stripped off her medical apron and began outfitting herself in her sleek, black tactical suit, heavily layered with dragon hide plating. She checked the magazine of her mundane assault rifle and strapped her wand to her wrist with a quick-release holster. "Mom," Harry said quietly, stepping into the medical bay. His left arm was wrapped in blood-soaked bandages, concealing the freshly carved black family runes that anchored his sanity. "We aren't waiting for her to launch another strike," Lily commanded, slamming a fresh magazine into her rifle. "Bellatrix wanted to make this about bloodlines. So be it. I eradicated Tom Riddle's soul from existence. I will wipe the Lestrange name from the earth." Hermione watched the mother and son lock eyes. There was no warmth between them, no comfort, only the shared, terrifying understanding of absolute, unyielding wrath. They were monsters born of necessity, preparing for slaughter. They needed Bellatrix's exact location, and the universe provided a victim. While scouting the perimeter of the Appalachian wards, Remus Lupin had captured a high-ranking Death Eater attempting to plant localized tracking hexes on the tree line. In Dolohov. Dolohov was chained to a reinforced iron chair in the center of a damp, freezing holding cell deep beneath the manor. Ron and Hermione stood behind a one-way enchanted mirror, watching the interrogation room with sinking stomachs. Harry Potter stepped into the cell alone. He didn't carry a wand. He only wore his dark combat robes, his combat knife strapped to his thigh. "Potter," Dolohov spat, a bloody smile revealing ruined teeth. "You think you can break me? The Dark Lord taught me to withstand the Cruciatus curse for hours. Your mother's parlor tricks won't work." Harry's frozen jade eyes stared through the Death Eater. "I'm not going to use the Cruciatus curse." Harry stepped forward and grabbed Dolohov by the throat with his right hand. With his left hand, Harry slowly unraveled the blood-soaked bandages on his forearm. Dolahov's sneer vanished as he saw the horrific, jagged lattice of lightning strike burn scars and the angry, bleeding runes carved over them. When Voldemort's spirit had been forcefully evicted and destroyed, it had left permanent psychic scar tissue in Harry's mind. Harry had learned to act as a psychic battering ram, forcing his way into a host's mind. Harry slammed his scarred, runic arm directly against Dolahov's bare temple. Harry didn't use legilimency. He bypassed the complex, delicate art of mind-reading entirely. Instead, he violently flooded Dolahov's mind with the residual trauma of the blood tether. He forced the Death Eater to experience the suffocating, claustrophobic agony of Voldemort's shattered soul being crushed under a collapsing mountain. Dolohov shrieked, a raw, inhuman sound that vibrated the concrete floor. Blood immediately began to pour from his nose and tear ducts. Harry didn't flinch. He leaned into the agony, using it as fuel, his face an impassive mask of stone. Behind the mirror, Hermione turned away, sobbing into her hands. "He's torturing him," she whispered. "He's ripping his mind apart. He's getting the coordinates." Ron replied, his voice shaking, unable to look away from the horror his best friend had become. 3 minutes later, Harry dropped Dolohov to the floor. The Death Eater was weeping, completely broken, his mind shattered by the psychic violence. Harry looked up at the mirror. Massachusetts, Harry said flatly. An old colonial estate on the coast near Salem. Heavily warded. That's where Bellatrix is. The Death Eaters did not rely solely on magical strikes. Bellatrix had brought a weapon designed for terror and physical butchery. Fenrir Greyback. The alpha werewolf had crossed the Atlantic with a singular mission, to hunt down and slaughter Remus Lupin, proving the dominance of the feral dark over Dumbledore's tamed beasts. The perimeter alarms tripped near a dense, fog-heavy lumber yard miles away from the main bunker. Remus, leading a routine patrol with Neville Longbottom, found themselves suddenly cut off. Anti-apparition nets snapped into place overhead, hissing with dark green magic. From the dense fog, Greyback emerged. He was massive, his robes torn, his fingernails elongated into yellowed claws, his eyes burning with unnatural yellow malice. "Little Mooney," Greyback growled, the scent of pine and damp earth mixing with his foul breath. "Running with the humans in a new world. The matriarch says I can eat the boy after I break your neck." Neville raised his wand, his hands trembling. "Stay back." "Neville, run," Remus ordered, his voice dropping to a terrifying, guttural rumble. "Get back to the ward line." "I'm not leaving you, Professor," Neville shouted. "I'm not your professor anymore." Remus roared, a sound that did not sound human. Greyback lunged, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Remus didn't raise his wand. He bypassed the standard defensive spells he had championed for years. In fact, Remus unholstered his wand and tossed it into the mud. If Greyback wanted a beast, Remus would give him the monster. Remus met Greyback's charge head-on. The collision of the two werewolves was brutal and deafening. They crashed through a stack of heavy timber, splinters raining down like shrapnel. Remus completely abandoned his rigid morals. He embraced the dark, feral magic that cursed his blood. Greyback slashed, his claws tearing deep into Remus's shoulder. Remus didn't flinch. He ignored the pain, driving his knee into Greyback's chest, shattering ribs, before wrapping his hands around the alpha's throat. Neville watched in horrified awe as the gentleman who had once given him chocolate on the Hogwarts Express fought with the desperate, trapped fury of a wolf. Greyback thrashed, realizing too late that Remus wasn't fighting to survive. He was fighting to kill. Remus bore Greyback to the muddy ground. With a sickening, wet crunch, Remus twisted violently, snapping the alpha werewolf's neck. Greyback's body went limp. Remus stood up, covered in mud and blood, panting heavily. He looked at Neville, his amber eyes tired and deeply scarred by the violence he was forced to commit. "The perimeter is secure," Remus rasped. "Let's go home." In the Appalachian armory, the mood was utterly grim. Sirius's condition was critical. Lily was preparing to load the Makusa transport vehicle for a frontal, suicidal assault on the Massachusetts estate. "We can't breach Salem," Hermione said suddenly, standing over Sirius's complex holographic maps. She wiped the tears from her eyes, replacing her grief with absolute, focused brilliance. Dolohov's memories showed overlapping elemental wards, kinetic barriers, and an army of mercenaries. "If we drive a truck into that estate, we will all die." "Then what is your tactical alternative, Granger?" Lily demanded, her patience gone. "We don't go to them," Hermione said, her voice steadying. "We bring them to us." Hermione turned to the corner where the sword of Gryffindor lay wrapped in canvas. "Sirius said the sword is an EMP against dark magic, but it's also a deeply connective magical artifact. And Bellatrix's blood curse on Sirius created a two-way tether. She thinks she's using it to kill him, but she accidentally forged a direct ley line connection from her wand to this bunker." Sirius, drifting in and out of consciousness on the medical cot, opened one sunken gray eye. Arithmetic spatial distortion. He wheezed, a bloody, terrifying smile crossing his lips. "Brilliant, terrifying mudblood." If I can write a reversal sequence using the Black family runes, and we channel the raw kinetic energy of the Sword of Gryffindor to power it, Hermione explained, moving her hands rapidly over the tactical display, we can invert Bellatrix's tether. Instead of letting her send a curse here, we use the tether to physically drag her and anyone within her ward line to a destination of our choosing. Harry stepped forward, looking at Hermione with a newfound, chilling respect. You want to forcefully apparate an entire army across the country? Yes, Hermione said coldly, finally fully embracing the pack's lethal pragmatism. But we can't bring them here. The bunker would collapse. We need an open space. A place where we control the high ground. A place they can't escape. Lily looked at the map, her dead green eyes tracing the topography of the American West. She placed a finger on a desolate, narrow gorge in the Arizona desert. A massive, isolated canyon of sheer rock. The Grand Canyon, Lily said, a cruel, predatory calculation settling over her aged face. We rigged the canyon floor with explosive kinetic runes. We set up the heavy artillery on the ridge. And then, Hermione, you pulled the trigger. The Hogwarts refugees were no longer fleeing. They had learned to weaponize their environment, their pain, and their magic. The Phantom Crusade was moving west to build a kill zone from which the British Death Eaters would never return. Here is the final, climactic conclusion to the Emerald Enigma Year 7, the Transatlantic Crusade. The narrative embraces the brutal, tactical reality the pack has adopted, culminating in a devastating final stand in the American wilderness. The Arizona sun was unforgiving, baking the red rock of the desolate, narrow gorge until the air itself shimmered with heat distortion. This uncharted sector of the Grand Canyon was a geographical dead end, a sheer drop on all sides, enclosing a rocky basin completely devoid of cover. It was nature's perfect kill zone. The Potter Pack and the Hogwarts Trio worked in grueling silence to transform the canyon into a fortress of absolute destruction. The Makusa tactical transport they had hijacked months ago was parked precariously on the highest ridge, overlooking the basin. Sirius Black, paralyzed from the neck down, sat inside the sweltering cab. His consciousness was entirely projected into the transport's magical targeting systems, establishing a localized network that linked to the heavy-caliber anti-aircraft gun mounted on the roof. Down in the basin, Harry and Neville were a blur of motion. Harry's left arm, covered in a thick, jagged lattice of burned scars and freshly carved black family blood runes, throbbed continuously under the desert sun. He knelt in the red dust, painting complex kinetic explosion runes onto the canyon floor with a mixture of dragon's blood and cordite. Spacing, Harry commanded, his frozen jade eyes scanning Neville's work. 5 meters apart. If Fiona Lestrange's vanguard drops outside the blast radius, they'll establish a shield wall. The explosions need to overlap perfectly. Neville wiped a mixture of sweat and red dust from his brow, gripping the canvas-wrapped Sword of Gryffindor strapped to his back. Fiona won't expect mundane explosives. She thinks this is a wizard's duel. She thinks she's a queen, Harry corrected, standing up and sheathing his combat knife. Queens don't look down at the dirt until they're buried in it. On the opposite ridge, Lily Potter lay prone in the dirt, her heavily layered dragon hide plating baking in the heat. She was looking through the optical scope of her enchanted mundane assault rifle. Her skin was incredibly pale, and her eyes held the terrifying, empty depth of a frozen lake. The bone-white streak in her hair caught the harsh desert light. Hermione, Lily's voice crackled over the enchanted earpieces. The perimeter is rigged. Anti-apparition nets are active. We hold the high ground. Begin the arithmetic sequence. Hermione stood at the mouth of the canyon, sheltered beneath an overhang. She didn't have a wand drawn. Instead, she knelt before a massive, complex geometric array she had carved into the stone. In the center of the array sat a vial of Sirius Black's blood, the anchor to Fiona Lestrange's horrific blood curse. Hermione closed her eyes, abandoning the protective, moral magic of her childhood. She reached out and grabbed the raw, violent tether Fiona had cast across the country, and she pulled. The spatial distortion did not sound like the familiar, sharp crack of apparition. It sounded like the fabric of reality was being violently torn apart. The clear, blue Arizona sky suddenly bruised, turning a sickening, necrotic purple. A massive, swirling vortex of dark energy ripped open directly above the canyon floor. The atmospheric pressure dropped instantly, kicking up a blinding cloud of red dust. Hermione's spell had worked. By inverting Fiona Lestrange's blood tether, she had forcefully summoned the matriarch and her entire army from their Massachusetts stronghold. They fell from the sky. Over 100 heavily armed Death Eaters, international mercenaries, and Snatchers were violently dropped onto the rocky basin of the canyon. Many crashed hard against the stone, disoriented and screaming as the brutal Arizona heat immediately replaced the cool New England autumn. In the center of the chaos stood Fiona Lestrange, wearing opulent, dark aristocratic robes that were now covered in desert dust. She looked around the sheer cliffs, her wand drawn, her face twisting from aristocratic arrogance into sheer, primal rage. "Shield walls!" Fiona shrieked, realizing instantly that they had been pulled from their fortress and dropped into an inescapable pit. "Find them, now," Lily whispered into the comms. Sirius Black triggered the ignition. From the ridge, the modified, heavy-caliber anti-aircraft gun roared to life. The deafening, mechanical thunder of the artillery echoed through the canyon, drowning out the screams of the Death Eaters. Enchanted, armor-piercing shells rained down on the basin, tearing through the hastily conjured magical shields and shredding the earth. Simultaneously, Lily opened fire. Her suppressing fire was a continuous, devastating stream of kinetic energy that pinned Fiona's lieutenants behind crumbling boulders. "The runes! Trigger the floor!" Remus Lupin roared from his position, firing concussive silver bolts from his heavy, repeating crossbow. Harry didn't hesitate. From his vantage point, he channeled a massive surge of magic into the grounding array. The entire floor of the canyon detonated. A chain reaction of kinetic explosions ripped through the Death Eater ranks. Columns of red earth and dark fire erupted into the sky. Fiona's army, trained for terror and psychological warfare against terrified British citizens, was being systematically dismantled by cold, calculated American military tactics. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Despite the overwhelming firepower, Fiona Lestrange was a survivor of the darkest magical wars in history. Surviving the initial bombardment, she rallied a core group of elite Inner Circle members. They began to weave a massive, interlocking dome of black, necrotic magic that absorbed the artillery shells and deflected Lily's sniper fire. "The heavy guns can't penetrate that dome," Sirius's mechanical voice relayed. "It's pure dark matter. It's absorbing the kinetic shockwaves." Harry unclipped his tactical harness from the ridgeline. "Then we break the glass from the inside. Neville, with me." Without waiting for response, Harry slid down the sheer rock face, dropping into the dust and smoke of the canyon floor. Neville Longbottom followed, his heart pounding in his chest, his hands gripping the hilt of the sword of Gryffindor. They sprinted through the smoke-filled battlefield, moving like phantoms among the dead and dying. As they reached the edge of Fiona's necrotic dome, Harry stopped. "I'll open the door," Harry said, drawing his combat knife. "You bring the EMP." Harry slammed his left arm against the black barrier. The Black family runes carved into his flesh reacted violently with Fiona's dark magic, creating a localized, agonizing friction that burned Harry's skin. But the sheer psychic pressure of Harry's will forced a temporary, human-sized tear in the shield. They stepped through. Inside the dome, 10 elite Death Eaters were channeling the shield. They turned in shock as the two boys entered their sanctuary. Neville didn't cast a spell. He raised the goblin-wrought sword high above his head and brought it down against the hard rock floor. The resulting electromagnetic pulse of pure, white kinetic energy was devastating. The sword's resonance shattered the concentration of the Death Eaters. The massive necrotic dome above them imploded, leaving them entirely exposed. Harry moved with the cold, soulless efficiency of an executioner. He ducked under a lethal green curse, driving his combat knife into the knee of a Death Eater, before snapping a localized gravity well that crushed two more against the canyon wall. Neville fought with equal ferocity. A Death Eater attempted to cast the Cruciatus Curse, but Neville swung the sword, completely cleaving the man's wand in half. The goblin's silver, saturated with basilisk venom, left a trail of white-hot light in the air. Together, the boy who was marked and the boy who could have been fought in perfect synchronization. The idealistic magic of Hogwarts was gone. They were the Reapers of Gryffindor, cutting a swath of blood and ruin through the center of the Dark Army. As the dome fell and Harry and Neville decimated her personal guard, Fiona Lestrange realized the battle was lost. The matriarch of the Dark Forces was entirely surrounded, her army bleeding out in the Arizona dust. But Fiona's madness demanded a final, spiteful victory. She looked up at the ridge, her eyes locking onto the matte-black transport vehicle raining artillery down upon them. "If my bloodline ends today, so does yours," Fiona shrieked. She abandoned her surviving men. Gathering the last reserves of her dark, twisted magic, Fiona cast a desperate, unanchored apparition, bypassing the canyon floor's localized nets by tearing her own flesh in the process. With a violent crack, she materialized on a ridge, directly beside the armored transport. Remus and Lily were too far down the ridge line to intercept her in time. Fiona blasted the heavy steel door of the transport off its hinges, stepping into the sweltering cab. Inside, Sirius Black sat strapped securely into the passenger seat with heavy canvas webbing. He could not move his arms or legs. His sunken gray eyes simply watched her enter. "Look at you," Fiona sneered, her face streaked with dirt and blood, pointing her wand directly at Sirius's chest. "A paralyzed machine. You betrayed our family, Sirius. You let the mudbloods and blood traitors poison our legacy. I'm going to enjoy watching the life leave your eyes." Sirius didn't look afraid. Despite his paralysis, a slow, bloody, terrifying smile stretched across his scarred lips. "You always were too dramatic, Fiona," Sirius whispered, his voice a gravelly hum. "You spent your whole life obsessed with the purity of the Black family tree. You should have realized by now. I'm the one who burns the branches." Fiona's eyes narrowed. "Avada." She never finished the curse. Sirius didn't need a wand, and he didn't need to move his hands. His consciousness was fully integrated into the truck's magical systems. With a single, final mental command, Sirius disabled the safety limiters on the goblin-wrought steel chassis of his hovering wheelchair. He intentionally overloaded the massive kinetic absorption runes that powered the vehicle's armor. "Goodbye, Fiona," Sirius rasped. The localized kinetic bomb detonated. The explosion was contained entirely within the cab of the transport. A blinding flash of blue, arithmantic fire vaporized the interior of the truck. Fiona Lestrange was consumed instantly by the blast, her body and her dark magic completely eradicated. The shockwave threw the ruined transport vehicle off the ridge, sending it crashing down the canyon wall in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Down in the basin, Harry stopped fighting. He looked up at the burning wreckage on the cliffside. The psychic tether that connected his blood runes to the Black family magic suddenly went dead, leaving a hollow, agonizing silence in its wake. The last son of the noble and most ancient house of Black had sacrificed himself, taking the matriarch with him, and ending the cursed bloodline forever. The silence that fell over the Grand Canyon was absolute, broken only by the wind howling through the red rock and the crackle of burning debris. The war was over. The British Death Eaters, the Snatchers, and the mercenaries were dead, their bodies littering the dusty basin. There were no prisoners. There were no trials. The Potter Pack had administered their own brand of lethal, terminal justice. Hours later, as the sun began to set, casting long, blood-red shadows across the desert, the survivors gathered at the mouth of the canyon. Hermione Granger sat on a rock, her hands shaking as she stared at the dirt. She was covered in ash and blood. She had orchestrated the slaughter of over 100 people. Ron Weasley stood beside her, his face pale and aged, staring into the middle distance. Neville Longbottom carefully wrapped the sword of Gryffindor back into its canvas sheath. The blade was heavy, burdened by the violence it had wrought. They had survived, but their innocence was buried in the Arizona desert. Lily Potter approached them. She moved slowly, the physical toll of her soul-burning magic and the exhaustion of the battle leaving her frail, yet her presence remained entirely commanding. She held out a small, rusted metal canteen, an unauthorized, untraceable portkey. "The coordinates are set for the edge of the Forbidden Forest in Scotland," Lily said, her voice quiet but firm. "The regime in Britain is dead. Without Fiona's gold and terror, the Ministry will easily be reclaimed by the Order. You can go home." Hermione looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. "What about you? What about Harry? You saved the world. Dumbledore, he has to pardon you." Lily's empty green eyes looked out over the canyon. "We crossed a line from which we can never return. Dumbledore's world cannot tolerate monsters. Hermione, even the ones who fight for the light. We don't belong in Britain anymore." Harry stood a few paces away. He was wearing his dark tactical robes, his combat knife secured at his thigh. He looked at Ron and Hermione, the two people who had once been his entire world. There was a profound, unbridgeable chasm between them now. They were meant for the light. He was meant for the shadows. "Take care of yourselves," Harry said, his voice entirely steady. He didn't offer a hug. He didn't offer a smile. He simply nodded. Ron swallowed hard, stepping forward to clasp Harry's right hand. "You too, mate. Don't lose yourself entirely out here." "I know exactly who I am," Harry replied. Hermione touched the canteen, followed by Ron and Neville. With a violent pull behind their navels, the three Hogwarts refugees vanished from the American wilderness, returning to a world that would forever sing songs of their bravery, ignorant of the blood on their hands. Harry and Lily were left alone in the encroaching darkness. Remus Lupin stepped out from the shadows of the canyon wall, his amber eyes sorrowful but resolute. The wolf had lost his oldest friend today, but he still had his pack. "Makusa Aurors will be investigating the seismic anomalies soon," Remus noted quietly. "We need to move." Lily slung her assault rifle over her shoulder. "Let them investigate. They won't find us." The Potter pack turned their backs on the battlefield, walking into the vast, untamed expanse of the American West. They were forever branded as legendary, terrifying monsters who saved the world by becoming its greatest nightmare. They had no home, no titles, and no peace. They were the silent watchers in the dark, armed, lethal, and waiting for the next time the world needed an executioner. The Hogwarts trio crossed the ultimate line, and Sirius made the final sacrifice to end the war. But at what cost? So, I have to ask, was their ruthless vengeance justified? If you think the Potter pack did what was absolutely necessary, comment justified. If you think they went too far and became the very monsters they swore to destroy, comment monsters. Drop your vote